I have done relationship management for over 10 years. I believe in proactive relationship management, proactive talent strategy, really building the industry relations and knowing who's who. And I think that's really important because we are a really close connected industry. But today we're talking about gender diversity, and it's something that all companies speak about, but are we really walking the walk? Today I am speaking with Tara Mustapha, who is the Chief Creative Officer at Playabl. So we know many women in the industry in top executive or C-level positions are in more traditional functions like the head of HR or general studio operations. And we know that these are valuable functions, but they do kind of span across all industries. We definitely know of the female CEOs in our industry, but we don't know as many female chief product officers or female chief creative game design officers. So Tara, can you tell us how you started out in your career and the growth path to attain your current position?
I can tell you that, but that's probably going to take 20 minutes of the session in itself because I'm old and archaic. No, I started, way back in the day. My dad was an early adopter, and he was always playing around with PCs and like a Commodore Amiga, and I would sit there watching while he would like program in Pascal and COBOL, which really dates me. And I would always be playing video games like King's Quest or International Kung Fu, and then Nintendo came along, and I was just playing more and more games. I always had my hands on the technology. So it became evident that I just love video games, and I was looking for a path to get into that because I love storytelling, I love puzzles, I love making people feel challenged and engaged in an emotional response, which is different from like any other film or creative outlet that you have, and I was really lucky to have that early exposure. So I ended up finding a path into the industry by going and doing 2 diplomas in Montreal and Vancouver, and then getting a job straight out of school at Backbone Entertainment, where I worked on an assortment of Nintendo DS titles and PS2 titles, and then into the Wii, and from then I was lucky to work at EA on the Skate franchise, and that was on the 360 and PS3, and then decided I wanted to go back into the startup world because I love wearing many hats and getting my hands dirty and all sorts of things. So I worked at Deep Fried Entertainment, and then from there, it was right when the transition was happening into free-to-play Facebook games. So Microsoft were heading up a department to move into that space and opened a studio in Vancouver, and that's when I was brought on to work with them there, and ended up working on a crazy MMO that was supposed to be Facebook and Windows Live Messenger, kind of a crossover there, and got to tune Korean games, and then Connect products, and that's kind of been my journey to date, with a stopover in New York as a producer for a digital agency. And then I decided to come back home to London and started working at Playabl, where I've gotten to merge my 2 passions, which is sports and game design, into one product.
All right.
See, 20 minutes.
So Tara actually mentioned to me earlier this week that she had done a similar panel to this 10 years ago for a Casual Connect in USA. So in that 10 years, have you noticed if there's been considerable changes, or are we still facing some of the same challenges today?
There haven't been enough changes. I think recently there's been more discussion, which is really exciting, about representation and sort of the equal treatment and payment and more roles for women and encouraging women in our industry. I think one of the big things that has changed is that 10 years ago, less girls at a younger age were getting involved in science and the math streams, and now there's more, the STEM, yeah, exactly. There's more encouragement for that. And I think one of the big things is form factor. So when you look at a controller, 10 years ago, the younger generation were maybe a little less encouraged to play those games, and it was a little more intimidating. And I think that's changed with mobile gaming, with PC gaming, with Twitch streaming and things like that. So it's gradually getting better, but I find the scary thing is in the span of my 15-year career, what's more changed is how I handle these situations rather than the situation changing to adapt to more diverse cultures.
Okay. So I think it's important to note that by no means is this going to offer any solutions. This is a dialogue, and I think it's a dialogue that every company should be having and across every industry, but games particularly. Thinking back over my own career, for those who don't know me personally yet, and I say yet, I worked almost 10 years in the casino gaming industry, like Al mentioned, and what I found is that many women in executive or even management level positions actually were less supportive or less likely to advance other women working for them. The Women in Gaming group for Casino noted that casino still tends to be a good old boys network, and so women who achieved those positions kind of adopted the same mentality, and they would make it tougher for a woman to advance to the same goals. Working in a somewhat similar area of esports or your sports predictive app, have you noticed this type of behavior of maybe women holding back other women?
I think there's certainly some elements that when I don't want to sound too angry, but when you've been fighting for so long, you kind of get defensive about the positions that you've earned. And I think there's a bit of that, but I think what's greater is that there's been more initiatives like Women in Games and Women in Sports or Women in Football, and I think there's Blacks in Games and other diverse groups that are getting more and more visibility. And I think it's having those discussions which encourage that kind of behavior, because we all have to support each other, and that kind of dialogue to come to the forefront of what's going on.
So do you think there's a way to identify this behavior? I don't want to say call out, because obviously it's not anything you want to shine a lot of negative attention on, but is there any way to start maybe nudging a course correction of this behavior?
I think it's a lot to do with, in my role anyway, mentorship and also working with the senior team to be able to say, look around at your team, your makeup, your diversity, look for opportunities to support and encourage and mentor everyone to be open and encouraging within these teams and communities. And I think this also speaks to, like, in particular, esports, the toxic communities that it's been labeled with, whether it's the Twitch streams or in general competitions, having no tolerance for that and shutting it down as soon as you can and encouraging people to have a responsibility for their communities, whether it's just teams that we work in or teams that you are participating in as a consumer, I think that's how we're going to get to do that. How do you feel, in hiring, having to deal with those challenges?
I think in recruiting, there's other challenges. I've actually noticed in casual or mobile games that I've seen a bit of this. I know that getting the reach out from the recruiter might not be always wanted, right? But an actual sincere reach out to build a network with successful women in the industry maybe shouldn't be so hastily dismissed. And I think that if we were all a little more cognizant of that, we could help build that network faster. I think it's the aim of all companies to attract and retain top talent. I think everybody in here who's running a business wants to work with the best people, regardless of gender. I think that with our industry, we have a lot of startups and smaller operations, so it's really important to build the values of diversity in general, not just gender, but all diversity, into your company culture from the start. Proactive succession planning and cross-departmental mentoring can actually be the catalyst to help women achieve these positions at a much faster rate. I actually was reading an article that I found online from The Verge that said they took a survey that 60% of Americans, including both men and women who play video games, assume that gaming is a male activity. 15% of those males surveyed identified themselves as gamers, whereas just 6% of women identify themselves as gamers. Women don't just play games that are aimed towards the demographic, nor do they necessarily want to design games that are just made for women. I think all of our experiences are going to help shape the products that we're creating for our consumers, and we're going to reach a much broader audience if we're utilizing everybody's previous experiences. Are you finding any challenges about potential candidates for your openings in this type of work that you're doing, this company that you're working with?
Yes. It's kind of twofold here because, I mean, we're a small startup. We haven't had that many openings. We're keeping it tight. We're keeping it just a closed group for now. But out of the 12 of us, I'm one of 2 women. And then the added layer of us being focused on traditional sports for now and then branching into esports. In traditional sports, it's hard to find people who are also passionate about that and want to apply that to some sort of product. So that's a challenge in itself. And then if you just look at how female sports, whether it's women in football or what's another example?
UFC has gotten much bigger with putting women on their card.
Yeah, exactly, and that's actually sort of inspirational in that way because they are part of the main event, you know? And I think we need to see more of that across the board.
Okay, makes sense. And I would say that our audience is almost similar to your company, 2 of 12 women. So, I mean, if there's any incidences or examples that anybody has, you know, we'd love to talk about them as well. Again, this is a dialogue, it's not a solution. You know, I love the fact that, you know, it is important to company CEOs and people that are starting their own studios. I was actually talking to somebody who, you know, said he gets recommendations about the best person for this and the best person of that. And I said, do you know what percentage of that recommendation is women? And it's a small percentage. So I think the fact is that this is not a female responsibility. It's an industry-wide responsibility. That specific survey that I mentioned, I think that they found that we need to recalibrate how we think about and better reflect in our products who is actually playing our games. Does that make sense?
And if you look at the viewership for esports right now, I think it's gone up to 15% of the demographic are female. But then you look at how there's been a shift in the content creation as well, because you've got people like Neha Tawari, who's the head of the YouTube Strategic Partnerships, that's the title, Anna Prosser-Robinson. If you look at all the analysts, there's a huge amount of analysts who are female, and why aren't they playing the games? But you can see on the production level, there's still roles that are being developed and women filling those. So I think that's an important initiative to bring visibility to.
Working with hiring managers, I think that I've heard a lot of wanting women designers because they're making games that women want to play. But I think that we need to stop that mentality as well, because we want to have women that want to design games that they want to play, whether it's Call of Duty or The Walking Dead, just a plug for us. So, like I said, open to any comments or questions. I know this isn't a topic that a lot of people like to talk about, you know, out loud. So Tara and I are always here as a resource as well.
Hi. That's not a question really, just something to discuss. I guess you wouldn't label Russia as a tolerant country, but at my department we have 8 people and 6 of them are girls. Like, there's only me and another guy. So the data is different depending on company, I believe, or a place. Moreover, I believe that's not a problem of an industry itself, but of society. The industry only represents a part of what society thinks about all this stuff. Coming to esports and Twitch, well, indeed, there are not that much women in esports. I believe I only know one girl who casts major events, Shiver. She casts Dota 2 events. Like, yeah, that's a problem. But again, that's not a problem of an industry, but of a society. Well, I guess that's it.
Makes
We can
sense.
discuss anything.
Yeah, of course, our industry is affected by the larger societal, views, right? We're experiencing a lot of different things in the female movement as of late, and I don't want to touch on that too much. I do believe that games does need to do a better job in marketing. It's usually the marketing and who they're going after that seems to make it still a male-dominated activity, and it's actually about equal. 50% male, 48% women report having played video games at some point in their life. And actually, it's interesting because as women get older, there's actually more playing, whereas men get older, there's less players.
Yeah, and further that point, you've got like Shox, who does the LCS here. She's awesome. You've got my background is kind of with the SC2 scene, so you've got Anna Prosser Robinson, who does some of the casting, Smixty, Neha, who runs the YouTube section. So there are like some key figures and women that I really encourage you watching. And if you're into Hearthstone, then you've got Hafu and Eloise. But I think that to sort of broaden that topic as well, you've got to look at the funding that's available. If you look at the number one top earner in esports, I think it's Scarlet with something like 172,000 in total earnings over the year. You look at the male side, I can't even remember who's number one, but it's like 2.4 million. That's a huge difference.
Big difference.
I actually wanted to really quickly talk on his point. Like, if society is part of the problem, then certainly working on the industry helps affect society, so. Yeah.
Yes, it's extremely symbiotic. And you know what? I think it's really, really important to mention that Jessica Tams has been running this conference for over 10 years, and she does an amazing job, and she's really been a strong, mentor for women in this field. So if you don't know her, go find her.
So when we're talking about esports, I would be interested, how many of the players are female in the first place in those multiplayer games that are potential esports games, and how many or how does the percentage change when it comes to like real esports events? Is there like a change in distribution?
You know what, I'd actually have to get back to you with the numbers because I don't have them off by heart. But there have been a couple of really cool initiatives to bring more equal playing for females. There's been the inclusivity, I can't remember the name of it, thing that happens I think it's at GDC that's run. There's a couple of all-female teams that run for, I think CSGO has actually quite a few female players. But the problem, and this is to the point of the prize pool, there isn't a prize pool or an infrastructure there to support being able to be a female pro player as much as there is for the male side. And I think, like to your UFC point earlier, if we have those sort of mixed cards or mixed teams and encourage that kind of play, there's no physical, like it's not like, I guess, tennis where you have Serena Williams actually kicking ass, but there's no physical barrier for mixed teams to not happen, So I think that's one key.
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering if the gaming community itself, with multiplayer games that are not that casual, but like CS:GO, is so harmful in the first place, or if it's just like when you get to the competitions where the real problem starts, or is it just like a slight change in I don't know.
I think it's eventually going to grow. I think that they're identifying more women that are playing sports or esports that are predominantly considered male, and I think that's just highlighting that and making sure that you know, your games and your experience can relate to them as well, to cultivate that, right? You want women to feel great about playing the games. You want them to have the same passion that men feel about playing those games. And to Tara's, you know, point, there's less passionate people at this point, but I think that the more leaders that are women in the industry get louder and more support, then it's just going to grow the community as well.
But I want to throw this back on you a little bit because, I'm a huge gamer. I've been all my life, right? I play, whenever I'm playing online games, and I'm hugely competitive too, I never speak. And sometimes I hear women speaking and I'm like, oh my God, they're brave. Because I would be terrified because people are salty. So my question to you is, when you see, you're playing your games, and you see some woman then being harassed about, oh, you're a girl, do you do this, do you do that, you know, some judgment on their appearance or whatever, over-sexualization and all that, what do you do?
That's a really good question, I would say. I played those competitive games. I played a lot of Battlefield 2, but back in the days it wasn't that popular to really speak. But I heard of the problem. Like, I guess I'm also out of this esports thing, so I think most of the games I'm playing, it's not really that much of a dialogue in there or like a voice chat. So I can't really answer the question, but it is a good question, and that's what also my question was pointing at this problem that from what I understand is that the community itself can be really harmful, and that it's hard to grow in this place, and I don't know.
So again, I think that no one has a solution at this point. It's really good to have these dialogues, and the awareness and the conversations about this are what is going to make the difference. So I think we have one other question, and then... Okay.
Yeah, probably just wanted to add a little bit. I recently met a girl playing Overwatch. She was on my team. She was really nice, and she used her mic a lot, and she communicated really well. I immediately added her on Friends, and I'm trying to play with her. She's awesome. Like, she's really awesome. And you know this kind of mentality, they say if you want to change something globally, start with yourself. I'm trying to make it better for girls to feel better playing games. Well, I'm not like segregating anyone. There's no difference for me. Well, she's really nice. There could be a guy on her place, and if he would be that nice, I added him. Like, it doesn't matter. Well, that's all. Thank you.
It's important, yes.
So I have one final question. You know, as you know, Christina, I go and I visit a lot of companies, a lot of game companies, and you know, I noticed that some are more diverse than others. But one thing that I found was interesting, and you touched on this earlier about, is it a woman's responsibility? There's a lot of guys who feel like, well, we shouldn't bring up gender issues. We should wait for the women to do it. And they kind of say, well, and if they're not doing it, then they're cool with it and they're okay with it. I don't know if that's just an observation that I'm seeing, or do you see that as kind of a problem that men are waiting for women to bring it up instead of taking the initiative themselves?
I think it's still a quiet discussion in the workplace. I think that male hiring managers know maybe what they're lacking in diversity. I think that there's desires to have a more diverse team. You know, we talked about it with how games were being designed, right? You know, having women designers design games that women like, right? But you know, I think that it's overall diversity, not just gender. I think that if we aim to make sure that we're building each other up and offering opportunities and creating just better people in the industry, that we're going to see more women get more opportunities.
One thing that I'm noticing is that young women and young girls seem to be more inspired in games with the ubiquity of smartphones and tablets. And now there are like small organizations that are encouraging young girls to code and things of that nature. So what appropriate measures you need you think need to be taken in addition to that to let them know, hey, these games that you're playing and enjoying are available for you to do as a career if it's something that you desire?
Well, I know that I follow certain groups through social media, like Girls Who Code, watching schools encourage STEM programs and offering what was traditionally something you wouldn't even be exposed to as a female until college in elementary school programs. So I think that we are getting there, and I think that it's becoming just more of an opportunity for kids, not just an opportunity for female children.
I'd just like to add to that. There's Amy Poehler's Smart Girls as a Twitter feed, and the Gina Davis Institution do a lot of visibility on those type of causes. But I also think it's a responsibility of all of us to choose which voices we're amplifying and what message we're sending out, because this dialogue, and I think this speaks to your point earlier, this dialogue kind of takes the sting off of it. If everybody just keeps on talking about it, it becomes easier, you know?
Well, with that, I'd like to thank both of you for keeping the conversation going, and for all the people in the
everybody
audience
for
who have
staying.
engaged. And thanks for staying for the final talk. So thank both of you.
Thank you.